In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, we're going to talk Jeremiah Fears versus Egor Demin. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I am your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, Leif Thulin, the man that watches more college basketball and probably NBA basketball than anyone else. And in this episode, like I mentioned in the open, we are going to talk about Jeremiah Fears and Egor Demin, two freshman point guards that have in the most case, solidified themselves as lottery picks in the 2025 NBA draft. But Leif has one player that he prefers more than the other. But before we get into this episode, I want to let you know about the Locked On newsletter. Check it out at lockedondaily.com. It is your one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox every single day. And if you are not subscribed to the Locked On NBA Big Boy YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode, because we're coming at you 5 days a week. And I'm biased, I'm very biased, but I think we are the number one source for NBA draft content. We have multiple personalities, even though I don't like necessarily using the word personalities because it may sound hot take-ish, but we have various opinions and different thoughts, and we share them with you every single day. And in today's episode, Jeremiah Fears versus Egor Demin. All right, Leif, you reached out to me saying you wanted to talk about these two guys. The last one we did where you wanted to talk about two prospects, it was Con Kneppel versus Liam McNeely. There were some debates in the comments, which is expected. But I think in this one, I think it's probably going to be even more of a debate. People are going to be more divided on the takes. Either way you go. What made you want to talk about Jeremiah Fears and compare him to Egor Demin? Why those two?
Well, honestly, I was scrolling through Twitter like 3 weeks ago, and someone said, "Well, Fears is probably going to have to go back to school." And I thought to myself,
Sam Vecini said the same thing in the middle of the Florida game last week.
yeah. So I looked at it, and I thought to myself, "Wait, I watched Egor Demin on TV the other day, and then I actually saw him live in person against Kansas, and that was a blowout, so there wasn't that much to watch, but still didn't put much pressure on the rim." And I decided to text you a while. I think that I first reached out about this, and we just had scheduling issues about that when I saw that tweet. And it was, I think Fears is better, and everyone's saying he's got to go back to school, but Demon's still largely considered a top 10 pick. So that was the premise. Then since then, Fears has had a 27-point, 10-assist game against a team that's in the tournament, and I see him in top 10s again. So I think there's some recency bias according to what I see online, but I've stayed pretty steadfast, and I know James has stayed pretty steadfast, which is surprise. If you listen to a lot, James and I tend to overlap quite frequently, and we don't talk about it. It's pretty strange. We just see prospects similar. Anyway, Jeremiah Fears to me is the better prospect between he and Egor Demin, despite being smaller. But the dude can score. He's the power of his team. Egor Demin's the most talented player on his team, but he's not the best player on his team, and he can disappear in a game. Jeremiah Fears is always a force. He's a threat to score. He touches the paint at will. He creates for others. And I know a large concern is going to go, he's 29% from three. He shoots 84% from the free throw line, gets to the free throw line. And to me, the best indication of how well someone can shoot is the confidence and the volume with which they attempt threes. And he shoots nearly 4 per game. And I just value the ability to be a lead on ball guy that I think can cause enough stress to create for others. I think Demon's a more gifted passer, but he doesn't create enough force with his drives or any pressure on the rim for the defense to react. It's just seeing over the defense.
I'm with you. I've been pretty steady with Fears. I have him at number 7 on my big board 3.0 that I just did the top 75 prospects. I know I put out the first 25 maybe a week and a half ago, but I did 75 prospects and I gave a deep dive, and I have I have Fears at number 7, and I have Demin at number 11. And the reason I have Fears higher is simply because I really value point guards, especially for the NBA game, that can consistently get 2 feet in the paint. And my knock on Egor, I love the passing, I love the size, and I think from day one he'd enter the NBA as one of the best passers in the league. But to me, in order to maximize your passing and your court vision, I think you have to be a threat to score. And with Egor, I think he struggles with ball pressure. And I actually had this conversation with a scout, and I had mentioned, and this was a fair assessment, and you can tell me if you agree or not. So I pointed out the Houston game, and I mentioned that he just looked scared against Houston. He did not, I don't want to say he didn't look engaged, but he just looked like he was afraid of Houston. And the NBA scout totally disagreed. Well, he agreed that Egor could have looked better against Houston, but he says, you're not going to find an NBA team that defends like Houston. That is a bad example. And so my example was, all right, well, can he bring the ball up against Jose Alvarado? What happens if he's your point guard and you're playing against Boston and Drew Holiday picks him up? And I think with Egor, my concern is I think the handle needs to get better. I don't think he can handle against elite ball pressure. And I'm concerned about the shooting because the shot has looked good. The touch is concerning. I've been following him since he was 15 or 16 years old. And I even labeled him as a shooter when I first started watching him. And now it's been like 3 or 4 years, and the shooting has been inconsistent. And even the free throw shooting is not good, but the shot looks like it should go in a lot more. And yes, Fear struggles, but I'm valuing Fears because I think that he's going to thrive with NBA spacing and he can consistently get in the paint.
I'm with you. And here's an example that's close to me because I go to every Jazz game. Isaiah Collier, if you were to watch the way he played at USC and growing up, you would say a driver, not a great shooter, someone who's going to be strong. And then you'd say there's flashes of great passing. Well, I watch him every game, and he, as of last game, was the second in the NBA in assists in the month of February, the entire NBA behind Trae Young. And it was close. Like it could easily change tonight. And the reason he gets these assists is he plays with relentless pace and he's able to touch the paint, whether it's in transition or it's in the half court. He's able to touch the paint despite being a non-shooter. He is a non-shooter at this point in his NBA career at 23%. Jeremiah Fears, is a significantly better shooter than Collier, in my opinion, in terms of what he will be. He may not be quite as forceful to the rim, but the reason I bring that comparison up, and it's not one that I say is like a one-to-one, but Collier is that good of a passer solely because he puts the pressure on the defense to react to the fact he's in the paint. And he almost is a reactionary distributor. He may not go in with a plan, the cerebral type like Chris Paul. It may be more in the vein of John Morant, where John Morant gets to the paint and he's a freak athlete, hangs in the air, finds who's open, who's where, and then finds the passer. Collier's somewhere in the middle where he may have a little bit more of a plan, but he's got these instincts and he sees the game, he sees what happens. And I think Fears has that. And he's a better natural scorer than Collier. But I've got even more respect for the value of paint touches and ability to put pressure on the rim from watching Isaiah Collier develop the last 24 games where he's been a starter.
Yeah, I think I would rather take a guy like Collier coming into the draft where you said he's a little wild, he's out of control, he's going to pick up a lot of charges because he drives without a plan. I think I would lean towards that as a concern than someone who I'm like, he doesn't get to the paint, and I don't know if he can get to the paint, and I don't know if he can handle ball pressure. Again, I like Demin. I don't know if he's a point guard. So up next, I want to ask you if you think he is a long-term point guard for an NBA team. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Now, we all know that investing involves risk, rate subject to change. A 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from the first match. You must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claimed is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC is a member of the SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold/LLC. All right, second segment. So here's a question. Coming into the season, I thought Egor Demin, I had him as a lottery pick. And then I did on my Big Board 1.0, I wrote about each prospect, and then I wrote about these are my questions or my question for each prospect coming into the season. If you go back and look at it, my question was, is Egor Demin a point guard? Because he has the size that allows him to play multiple positions, it's not a bad thing if he does not end up being a point guard. And then I watched the first 4 games, and I was like, oh, he's definitely a point guard. Now I have concerns that I don't know if he's going to be a full-time point guard in the NBA. He still brings value because of his size. What are your thoughts on that? Is he a full-time point guard for you?
Yeah, I think he has to be because I don't believe in his shooting that much. I think his shot looks better. I used to think he shot with too much of his wrist, a little bit too much of a fling. It looks a little better to me watching him warm up, watching him shoot in person at BYU. But I think he's got to be a prime. Maybe someone can share some ball handling, but he's got to be the pick and roll guy because that's the value he provides in the basketball court. And you could think of maybe Joe Ingles, you can think of Josh Giddey as kind of taller guys that aren't putting pressure on the rim, but are pick and roll guys because they see the floor very well. Giddey didn't shoot well. Ingles was a great shooter. So I think the way you get the most value out of him has to be at the point guard. And that was the issue why Giddey didn't fit in Oklahoma City is he wasn't able to space, and they had someone who put more pressure on the rim and was better with the ball in his hands than Shea. And that's not a knock on Giddey. He could really distribute. But I think he has to be a point guard to have the value that we expect from someone of his size and stature, because what are you going to have him out there doing otherwise if he's not distributing offensively? And then I have concerns defensively. I just don't think he's that good of an athlete. I think he looked inflated as an athlete when he played against Central Arkansas. He would get to the rim and he'd dunk it. I haven't seen him get to the rim, even when he has an advantage given to him by a screen. He stops, retreats, skip passes. And the passes, spot on, right on the money, right on time. But you got to be able to make the defense respect you as a scorer as well. And I think his scores typically come in the defense sagging off. He hits a 3 or he goes to the free throw line, but it's not forceful. And so I'm a little lower. I'd probably put Demin at 14 or 15 out of respect for his passing ability. I think there's a world in which he makes a real tangible impact on the NBA team. So it's not low in a draft. But I have less upside belief in Egor Demin than I came into the season with.
Yeah, I still think he has a lot of upside. I think there's a few things that he needs to improve. One, I think the ball handling needs to improve. He has a good handle, but it's not tight enough to where guys aren't going to gamble. Like there's some guys you're just not trying to pick up full court. And if you do, you're just trying to put a little bit of light pressure on them to wear them down. And then there's guys that you're picking them up because you feel like you can turn them 3 or 4 times and you think that you can really disrupt the offense because they can't handle. I want to read a quote from you from Chris Kesey, one of our biggest supporters. He says, Demin running point allows for greater variance and scheme defensively than Fears with similar offensive playmaking. When you have a tall ball handler on the board, you have to take him. What are your thoughts on that?
I generally agree in the sense of when you have a guy who is a jumbo initiator is the term I typically like to use. When you have a guy who is tall, can make a team respect you in a different capacity, it allows you to have different ways to use them. And then defensively, he can defend different positions. So there's even more value, even if he's not a great shooter. Like think of Topic last year. I like Topic for that reason, even though he was not a great shooter. I think there's value in that because there's inherently a mismatch that happens if you put a 6'9" point guard on the floor. But I think Fears has this quick twitch capacity that Egor Demin lacks, and it's night and day between the two. Fears is right at the rim in a hiccup, and he gets to the rim, he kicks the ball out. He's demonstrated an ability to hit mid range. He's demonstrated an ability to hit threes, and he's not scared at all. Demin plays timidly, not only against Houston but against most teams, and I think there's a mindset difference between the two.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What are your thoughts on this? I spoke to an agent. I don't know if it was agent or scout. I don't remember. I was talking to so many people over the last few weeks. And he mentioned that no team is going to take Fears over Yakachonis or Demin simply because teams are going to overvalue size. The agents usually have their issues with front offices. But he says he doesn't think a team is smart enough to take Fears over Yakachonis and Demin because they're going to overvalue the size and they're going to overvalue their European experience. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't necessarily disagree, but I think everyone's got their own unique evaluation skills for a team. The thing about Yakachonis that differentiates he and Demin is he puts pressure not necessarily on the rim, but he puts pressure on the defense because he's got a very, very good step back. He steps back and he knocks down threes. And I know he's gone through a bit of a cold streak, and Illinois has been sick as a team. They've missed their big guy who's a critical part of their offense. They've had inconsistent shooting as a whole. But every time he dribbles and comes off a screen, you have to fear the fact he's going to either go to the rim and jump stop and draw a foul because he's crazy clever, or he's going to step back and shoot a Luka-esque step back three. Demin doesn't put either the pressure on the rim, the pressure to foul, or the step back three. Though I think he's a better passer than Yakachonis, I think it's marginal. So I don't think Fears can leapfrog Yakachonis, even though I think there's a world in which his ceiling could be higher as an on-ball scorer at the NBA level. I do think there's a world he leapfrogs Demin, despite Demin being the tallest of the trio. I just don't think scouts are going to be enamored by his lack of shooting and lack of change of pace. Like, he doesn't play with a pace that's fast, and he doesn't change pace either. And honestly, it kind of reminds me of the steady guards that thrive in college in like year 2 or 3. Like a guy who's really good, but he shoots it very well, Ty Jerome, one of my favorite players I ever watched in college basketball. He doesn't change pace all that well, doesn't put that much pressure on him, so he's relying on floaters, but he shoots 50% from three. Like, that's slight exaggeration, but Demin's not going to touch those numbers. Demin's just bigger, and so you have to believe, we've seen the archetype of Luka, of Cade, of all these guys that are big and create, but those guys have an eye for the rim, and Demin just doesn't have that to me.
And they're physically bigger. They're physically
they're thicker for
stronger.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, up next, I want to talk about the lottery. I want to ask Leif if he thinks both could end up being lottery picks. And if so, why? And if not, why not? And then we're going to talk about NBA fit and potential. NBA fans, get ready, because when they swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in an NBA game, you score a huge deal the next day. It is simple. When any player drops 50 or more in a game during the 2024-25 regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order and up to 10% off the next day from noon to midnight. So if a guy drops an epic 50-point performance, you can celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot, delivered straight to your door. All you have to do is sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When a player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day and up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. All right, last segment. So I mentioned that I have both in the lottery. I have Fears at number 7, and I have Demin at 11 on my big board 3.0. Where do you have them on yours? I don't even know if you have an official big board. Where do you have them at on yours?
Yeah, I haven't put out an official board, but I would probably have Fears at 6 or 7. I've had him as high as 5. I haven't been able to get him over Yakachonis, and honestly, Yakachonis has struggled of late, but Fears, like many people have said, and Sam Vecini mentioned, might go back to school, or might consider going back to school. So
He's not going back to school.
Yeah,
I think
I
his
agree.
dad even laughed at that publicly, but he's not going back to school.
No, the idea is that he struggled in those recent games up until the last 2, and so people thought, oh, he's going to drop. I think he's clearly a lottery pick. I've had him as high as 5 as my point. I think I'd have him 6 right now, 6 or 7. And as for Demin, I'd probably go about 14, 15. And it really depends on what teams are picking at that tail end of the lottery and how much pressure they're under to win soon versus how much of an experimental phase they're in. And that's where I think Demin in a time where he's allowed to tinker and grow, I think could become quite a good pro. But I think immediately the pressure and the way that teams would guard him, like you said, they'd get up under him, they'd make him drive. I don't see him being able to thrive, even though he's played the professional basketball. Whereas Yakachonis, I think, wouldn't be thrown off by pressure.
Yep. What's interesting is it was a few years ago. It's actually back. I was in Utah, where you're at, and I met Ronnie Price, longtime NBA veteran Ronnie Price, and he was talking about like the mindset of like a backup point guard or a guy that has to come in and make an impact in a limited time. And he said that he studies different guards. And if he finds there's a guard that he doesn't trust their handle, he's picking them up full court and he's just going to be an irritant and a nuisance to them. He knows he has limited minutes. He knows that he doesn't have to play that way for 35 minutes per game, but that's his job, is to come in and be a disruptor. And that has stuck with me. And I remember he told this story. I mean, this was at least 10 years ago. I heard him tell this story. He named all the guards in the NBA. He was like, this guy can handle, this guy can't. This guy, if I see him on the floor, I'm in his shirt. And he jokingly said, Kyrie Irving, I leave him alone, because he's like, he will make you look bad and he will embarrass you. So I thought about that philosophy, and I think about that sometimes when I'm evaluating guards. And with Egor, he fits the type of guard that a backup point guard that has a limited time to make an impact is probably going to, his eyes are going to get big when he sees Egor, because he doesn't think he can handle. So with that being said, that's why I think Egor needs to go back to school. Unlikely, I don't know. I mean, I've heard some people say that he's never really put it out there that, he wants to be one and done. He's not in a rush. He's made good money. He doesn't have to go out and like take care of his family, yada, yada, yada. And I've mentioned it before. I don't want to go in depth again, but I think going back to school for him would probably be more beneficial, because you get to play games as opposed to sitting. And then me personally, I would much rather play at BYU in the Big 12 than spend my rookie year going back and forth in the G League. What are your thoughts on that? We've talked about Fears going back to school. I don't think it's possible, but what do you think about Egor going back to school?
No, I think this is very possible. So BYU has tons of money. They're paying $7 million or so for AJ. And now you have a team that has AJ, Kenan Catchings, Stanton, all these guys coming in, and a coach who runs a pro-style basketball offense, and he has time to get stronger. And Yegor's from a family that kind of is believing in a lot of what BYU does, not necessarily in from the religious side, but just from the, he's a young kid. He doesn't want to party. He doesn't want to do these things, is what I've heard. And so I think it could behoove him to grow in a place that aligns with how he believes, as opposed to being propelled up to the NBA and then, like you said, shuttled back and forth from G League to NBA and on this tour with grown men. I think being with younger people and developing the game with an NBA style coach, but he has this cushion of, hey, he's playing college guys, he's already played pro basketball, could really benefit him. So I made that point to someone I watched the BYU game with. And it was basically, yeah, if they've got the money for it, then why not? And they do. So I talked to a guy who used to coach BYU fairly frequently. He's a couple of years out, but he still watches all their games and is very in tune with it. And he thinks it's very possible that Egor Demin comes back. Hasn't heard anything definitive, but it's just the way that BYU conducts themselves. I would not be surprised if they find a way to bring back Egor Demin and really make a push to national relevancy. I know they're top 25 right now for the first time this season, but I think with AJ and Egor, this is a team that probably would get top 15 national votes preseason.
Yeah, if I'm Egor in his camp, I'm coming back to school unless I have a guarantee from San Antonio, which I don't even know if that makes sense now with Fox. San Antonio, if I have a guarantee from Brooklyn, I'm out of there because I think there's a pathway for a lot of playing time right there. And then Sacramento, but Sacramento's pick could end up going to the Hawks. Other than that, I don't know if there's a favorable situation where you can come in and get a lot of playing time and develop. And I think he'd get more minutes playing at BYU than he would in the NBA unless he goes to a few of those teams. And if money's not the deciding factor, I would choose the college lifestyle. Real quick, did you get a chance to watch the Arizona game this weekend?
I watched part of it. I was working the Jazz game, so I saw bits and pieces of that game. I thought Richie Saunders was the best player on the floor, though.
And in that game, I thought Egor played good. I didn't think he played great. I mean, he did have 6 turnovers. I will say that. He had 13 points, 8 assists, but he did have 6 turnovers. He was 6 of 11 from the floor. I thought he struggled when KJ Lewis was on him. I thought he really struggled in the corner. But there was one play I felt like he got by him, but it was like he pounded the ball. He needed a lot of dribbles to get by him. But I felt like he took 11 shots, so I'll take the aggression. I mean, there have been multiple games where he's taken less than 10 shots. He was 1 of 5 from 3, but he didn't get to the foul line. And if you just look at like his last, 3 games, 3 foul attempts, last 4 games, it comes up to like 7 free throw attempts. Like he just doesn't get to the line. Mm-hmm. How do you think that bodes for his NBA fit and potential?
I think it bodes poorly because I don't think he's the athlete that I was told he was. When I read scouting reports or watched highlights, the highlights show him dunking. But ever since Big 12 play has begun, I don't think I've seen him drive by anyone authoritatively. It's usually I'm off a screen, I drag it out, I extend it horizontally rather than going north-south. It's east-west for him. And so he extends the ball screen and then he passes. Whereas against Central Arkansas, I remember once he drove left and dunked one, and I was thinking, wow, like this guy could be really good. But the Houston game was super telling. Houston overwhelmed him physically. Yes, they may not play the hard hedge, trap, recover in the NBA. They don't. But it still is telling that a team that's athletic and older can really rattle a guy despite him playing professional basketball. I think it's telling that against Kansas, even though Hunter Dickinson can't guard a chair, he didn't drive past him once. He just settled and waited to shoot threes or then drive and kick out. Whereas some of his teammates tried to expose that matchup and did so successfully. That said, he passed the ball and made the right plays and they killed him. But I do think the lack of paint touch, lack of free throw attempts does concern me about the potential, because you look at all these guys we talk about that are excellent passers. It's because they command such attention for their scoring abilities, and it's prolific. Trae Young, great scorer, and they're totally different players, but he's a great scorer, but he leads the NBA in assists. Then you look at Cade Cunningham, who has a chance to be all NBA this year. It's because he's a really good scorer. He's able to rack up these assists because he makes the right decisions and plays with great tempo. Luka, who in my opinion is the best passer in the NBA. He makes amazing decisions because he's an excellent scorer, and they have to command so much respect. He doesn't command the respect because he doesn't score. And that's what limits my belief in terms of his top 10 prospect, the way he was labeled entering the season.
Yeah, we always talk about bigs born in the wrong era. Egor might be a guard that was born in the wrong era. If this were the era where point guards were just table setters, top 5 pick. But now you want your guard to put pressure on the rim. And speaking of the Kansas game, he was 2 of 7 that game. They won the game. I mean, they smacked them 91-57. But he was 2 of 7 from the floor, and 5 of his 7 shots were threes. I'm just looking at his stats. The best game as far as him getting to the foul line, well, he had the Ole Miss game where he got to the foul line 7 times. And that was like the beginning of the struggle for him, because remember, he had like those first 5 games where he just feasted off of weaker competition. Thanksgiving came, and then that game he was 4-7 from the line. Then he had the Providence game where he only played 22 minutes, and that was a game where he was 0 of 10 from the floor. And even though he was 0 of 10 and he struggled, I thought he made some good plays that game because he was still somewhat aggressive, and he got to the line 6 times in 22 minutes. And I thought some of the shots he missed were actually good shots. It was like they set a screen, he put the defender in jail, he shot the pull-up jumper, couldn't make a shot. But since that game, he just has not really been aggressive. He has a couple games against Cincinnati and Baylor where he got to the line, and then sometimes the free throw numbers don't really tell the aggression, because you can rack up 3 or 4 free throw attempts if the game is close and you're the point guard and they foul you, and it may look like you were being aggressive. But he's had just a lot of games where he just didn't get to the foul line at all. He had a game against Central Florida, no foul attempts. A game against Kansas State, no foul attempts. A game against Cincinnati, 1. The last game against Arizona, 1 free throw attempt.
And the bad thing is, if you watch college basketball, all those teams put pressure. And yeah, pressure makes you turn the ball over occasionally. But if you pressure, like Ronnie Price said to you, you run the risk of being burned. And if you cross someone over because they're pressuring high, you should be able to get to the rim. And all of those teams, Cincinnati's a defensively oriented team that plays high. They're aggressive, which means they foul, which could be 1-and-1 free throws. It could be going to the rim by beating someone who's over pressuring. The UCF is a very aggressive ball club. All these, Arizona pressures up to half court and has very strong dudes that are prone to fouling, and he didn't shoot free throws. So it's more concerning if you watch the context of the collegiate basketball that he's not attempting any. Not even going to the paint. It's not even, hey, he hasn't been fouled there. It's not, he hasn't been in that like location. The area code hasn't been touched.
All right, here's a question for you. We'll start with Egor. If he maximizes his potential, what does that look like?
See, I'm not sure, because I don't know what to envision of his 3-point shooting. You'd ideally hone into some of those traits, round out the body, make him a little stronger. But then I still have questions about the 3-point shooting. So I'll go with Josh Giddey. Okay. And I think he might be a better passer naturally than Giddey. But I think that's probably the player that comes to mind.
And Josh Giddey is having a good year in Chicago. I just had this conversation with somebody. What does he sign for this year? And off the top of my head, I'm like, can Giddey get $15 to $18 million a year? I think it's possible. Even if it's like $345, that is a bargain contract in today's NBA. Jeremiah Fears, if he maximizes his potential, who is he? Or what does that look like?
I don't have a comp, but I think he can be a 20-point per game scorer in the NBA who gets 20 and 6. I don't think he's a gifted passer, but I think he's a guy who can put pressure on the rim enough to create for others, handle pressure, knows how to score at all 3 levels. And he's not a huge guard, but he's not small either. So I think defensively he can be okay. He can compete. It'll be about want to on that end of the ball. So I think he's got a capacity to score 20+ in the NBA.
You think the measurements are legit? I've seen some people question if he's really 6'4".
I bet he's about 6'3". I don't know. Like VJ Edgecombe, I've seen some sites even list him at 6'6". Like to me, to me, he's 6'3". I think Fears and Edgecombe look eye to eye.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Let us know your thoughts. If you are a general manager, you got one pick to choose a point guard, and you had to choose between Jeremiah Fears or Egor Demin, who are you taking and why? Let us know in the YouTube comments. Once again, it's Rafael Leif Thulin. We are out of here.